Al Jazeera Podcasts.
और क्या लड़की इसलिए जन्म लेती है कि शादी संबंधों की आड़ में रोज उसके साथ में बलात्कार हो? क्या उसकी अपनी कोई जिंदगी नहीं होती है? क्या उसकी कोई इच्छाएं नहीं होती है?
In India, gender-based violence is a harsh reality. According to India's National Crime Records Bureau, roughly one woman or girl is raped every 16 minutes. Oscar-nominated documentary film To Kill a Tiger tells the story of a 13-year-old girl's attack and her courage to seek justice. I want to know how she did it. I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know. We're dedicated to amplifying women's voices, stories and topics we're all thinking and talking about. This is a safe space where we go all in, so by the end of each episode you can say, now I know. Nisha Pahuja is an award-winning filmmaker known for daring, socially driven documentaries. To Kill a Tiger is no exception. Through intimate storytelling, she follows one father's courageous fight for justice for his daughter. And Nisha joins us right now. So thank you so much for talking to us on Now You Know.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I had the pleasure of watching To Kill a Tiger, and it is a powerful story of perseverance and justice. Can you just tell us more about it and why you decided to tell this story?
Well, I actually didn't choose to make this film. To Kill a Tiger wasn't the story that I had set out to make 10 years ago when I began this project. At the time, I was actually making a completely different film that was looking at masculinity in India. And I was following the work of the organization that's featured in To Kill a Tiger. And they were running a program, a gender sensitization program, working with men and boys across 30 villages in the state of Jharkhand. And that was the film that I was going to make. I was actually going to make a film sort of following the work of this organization as they sort of transformed men and boys in these communities. And Ranjit, the father in To Kill a Tiger, was enrolled in these groups. And then this horrific thing happened to his child. And suddenly I started to just really follow that story.
महिला के साथ गैंगरेप की खबर एक बार फिर से सामने आई है और एक बार फिर से इस हैवानियत भरे हादसे ने इंसानियत को हिलाकर रख दिया है। कल रात झारखंड के बेरू जिले में 13 वर्षीय नाबालिग बच्ची के साथ बड़ी ही बेरहमी से बलात्कार किया गया। यह हादसा उस समय हुआ जब लड़की अपने घर के पास ही एक शादी के समारोह में शामिल होती है। इन तीनों को स्थानीय पुलिस ने हिरासत में ले लिया है और पीड़िता बच्ची फिलहाल अपने घर पर है। जिस तरह से औरतों के साथ लगातार उत्पीड़न के मामले सामने आ रहे हैं, हमें खुद से पूछना होगा, क्या हमारे देश के बुनियादी ढांचे में कोई कमी तो नहीं?
And the idea was that the story of Ranjit and his daughter would be sort of the spine of this larger piece on masculinity that I was going to make. And it was only after about 2 years of editing, 2 years of kind of whittling down hundreds of hours of material that we sort of finally realized, that whole idea about making a film about masculinity we just had to abandon it. And what we really had to focus on was this very, very powerful story of a father's love for his daughter.
अब बेटी की कहना है कि जो भी बोलती है कि हम मर जाएंगे लेकिन हम वापस नहीं लेंगे। वो उतना हिम्मत रखती है, बच्ची लड़की हो तो हमको मान के चलिए उतना बहुत अच्छा लगता है कि चलो हिम्मत है, जैसा हम लोग हिम्मत किए हैं वैसा तुम्हारा है हिम्मत। उसी के सहारे हम एकदम डर भय पूरा एकदम खत्म हो जाता है।
I mean, when I watched it, there were moments when I had to stop.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine the trauma that Kieran, her father, her mother, or the whole family went through. There's a part in the film where the public defender on their case, on Ranjit and Kiran's case, he mentioned that he's handling more than 400 cases of rape. Would you say that number is low?
I mean, in terms of his workload, no. I think that seemed pretty sadly accurate, right? I mean, that was sort of the workload that was on him specifically as the public prosecutor. But we know the actual numbers of rape, not just in India but globally around the world. There is tremendous underreporting. And the reason there is this disparity is there's a resistance. There's a resistance in terms of survivors coming forward. There's a fear. There's a sense of shame. There's a sense of guilt. There's a lack of faith in the justice system, in feeling like you're going to be believed. The entire system is actually set against survivors. It doesn't support survivors. It doesn't work for survivors. And so I think that's why there's underreporting.
It was an eye-opener.
Yeah.
From an outsider, and I was watching it again. I messaged my senior producer and I left a ranting voice note because, I couldn't wrap my head around the way of thinking, the victim blaming. What you managed to get out of the villagers, in fact, everybody in the film, it was just incredibly telling.
प्रेजेंट नहीं थी तो ये घटना कैसे हुआ? ये भी बहुत मेजर हमारा मतलब उसमें भी फोकस होना चाहिए.
हर बात सिर्फ लड़के का गलत नहीं रहता है, कुछ तो लड़की का भी रहता है. आपका मचलना, पहनावा ओढ़ावा, लिफ्ट, कमीज, कुछ ना कुछ लड़की का भी दोषी रहता है. थोड़ा बहुत लिफ्ट के बाद लड़का में भी कुछ शरारत आता है.
How did you manage to gain everybody's trust?
It's like anything when you're making a film about people, and I think especially when you're going into a situation that is so delicate and so so fragile, right? It was a real gradual process of gaining their trust, of them kind of feeling comfortable. It took time, but now it's like family. There's a real closeness and intimacy that develops over like 10 years of being involved in something together.
Have you found that the film has sparked conversations about gender violence in India? Well, I suppose not just in India, but worldwide.
A lot of people reached out. A lot of survivors reached out. And I think a lot of people celebrating the courage and the resilience of the family, the bravery of the survivor to come forward in this case. And of course, this incredible family that stood by their daughter. I think that was a tremendous inspiration. I'll share one story that was, of real impact. I mean, there's a couple. There was a survivor who saw the film and decided to press charges, and it became sort of a kind of a big public story, or relatively public story. But Ranjit told me something the other day that was so incredible, and it was after the film came out in India, when it was released on Netflix. There was a man who drove 8 hours on his motorcycle to find him, tracked him down, and thanked him for doing what he did, because he himself did not have the courage to stand with his daughter, and she committed suicide. And he wanted to thank Ranjit for his bravery.
What happened to Kiran? It was devastating.
Yeah.
And the fact that she didn't get the support from her village.
Yeah.
They're fighting against a system.
Yeah.
But to have a father fight for his daughter, it was a beautiful thing. How rare is it that you have a father fight for his daughter in that way, and especially in India.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just based on what the organization was saying, based on, the work that they're trying to do to get men to stand up, it's obviously it's rare,
पिता अपनी बेटी का सामूहिक बलात्कार के केस को लेकर उठा है, ये अपने आप में छोटी घटना नहीं है. ये अभी हुआ नहीं, मतलब ऐसे बहुत रेयर देखने को मिलता है.
But why is that? Why won't those fathers fight for their daughters?
I think there are a number of reasons. I think one is that there is a culture of blaming the survivor. Blaming, right? It's not the perpetrator's fault. That attitude that you see expressed so often in the film, right? It was, well, what was she wearing? It was the way she walks.
The village ward, he said that.
Yeah. She brought it upon herself. I mean, that is a pretty pervasive. It's a very pervasive attitude around the world, right? That attitude that somehow a survivor brought it upon themselves. So I think that's part of it. It's the blaming, and then I think in India, it is such a culture rooted in community and honor and shame and saving face. So it's why, for example, the father that went to sort of thank Ranjit, I mean, the reason he couldn't, it's because he didn't have the courage to face the community, the shame. It's all about honor and shame.
There was something that kept on coming up, like a theme that kept on coming up during the film. And it was the suggestion that Kiran should marry one of her rapists. And again, this came from the whole village, even the elders, the women, they just said, oh, why can't she just marry him? And like that would just magically sweep everything away.
अगर वही चीज गाँव में सलेड़ जाता कोई बतुआ, तो लड़का या लड़की की कोई तो दो करना नहीं रहे.
तीनों लड़का के साथ शादी करते हैं.
एक लड़का से करते.
तो बाकी का दो लड़का.
लेकिन दो लड़का का नहीं है गलत, एक ही लड़का का गलत है.
दो लड़का और कुछ नहीं किया.
नहीं.
आपको कैसे पता?
हमको पता है तभी तो बोल रहे हैं.
और अब हम आप ही से पूछ रहे हैं. अब आप बताइए आपको कैसे पता? अपना घर का छोटा-छोटा बेटी है, उन लोग से पूछिएगा कि अच्छा मैया बताओ, जो लड़का तुमको जबरदस्ती पकड़ के रेप करता है, बलात्कार करता है, उसके साथ तुम ब्याह करोगी? कोई लड़की हाँ बोलेगी? पूछिए तो.
Why was this a common suggestion?
I think, again, it has to do with honor and shame, right? The sense of, well, she's spoiled, she's ruined, right? And that's obviously, it's the identity of a woman, the value of a woman is her virginity. That's where it rests. And so, now that she's been defiled, no one's going to want her. So this is the solution. We're offering you a solution. And I think it really has to do with the way you look at girls and women. They don't see it as rape. They see it as sex, right? They don't understand the act, the violence of the act and the transgression that has been done against. They don't perceive it in that way. They don't understand the trauma. They don't understand what it means to be violated, what it means to have your autonomy taken in that way. They perceive it in a completely different way. They don't see it as a crime.
What were you hoping to achieve by making To Kill a Tiger?
Change and impact. I think for a lot of people, the idea of her coming forward, the idea of her kind of, showing herself is problematic. We did this big awards campaign. We were nominated for an Academy Award, which was incredible. And for us, that was about really kind of building the visibility around the film, the visibility around the issues. And we use that as kind of a springboard to what we're doing now, which is something called Stand With Her. It's literally kind of a movement that we're creating around the film. And we have a number of goals, but I would say the three key ones are for people to start to support survivors, to hear survivors, to listen to survivors, to kind of change the system, to begin to be supportive of survivors. and I just want to preface all of this by saying there's no way that one film is going to bring about this massive shift.
But it can start. I mean, you got the ripple effect.
Exactly. And everyone has to do their part. So this is our way of kind of doing our part and, amplifying. The second, of course, is to encourage other men and boys to stand up. And it's not necessarily just as allies for women and girls. It's actually looking at this entire system, what we call patriarchy, and seeing it for what it is, which is, in a very fundamental way, it's something that is a prison for all of us. It's a systemic issue that we all have to deal with, and we all have to understand what it imposes upon us. It imposes roles on women, and it imposes roles on men. And then the third thing that we're doing is we're creating this curriculum that we're getting into schools, first in the United States and then eventually around the world, that basically is using the film, and we're creating a curriculum around it because we feel obviously education is the key to prevention.
I understand the premise of involving men. And yes, they can be, victims of the patriarchy. But isn't there more of a need to focus on women more? Because the perpetrators of sexual violence are normally men.
Yeah. I think the two need to work together. It's like what Mahinderji says in the film, about 20 years ago or 25 years ago, now 30 years ago, they sort of they were working with women, trying to empower women. And what they noticed was crimes against them, violence against them. It didn't subside. It continued to mount. And that's when they realized that they also needed to work with men. So I don't think that they cancel each other out. I think that you have to walk sort of hand in hand, And I think if you're just focusing on one, then you're continuing this binary, men versus women. Men need to support women. Men need to stand up for women. All of that is true. There's no doubt. But they have to support women because fundamentally it's in their own best interests, right? Because if you just position it as they need to support women, then you're kind of reinforcing this idea that they are protectors or are needed, in some way. And what we really want to do is to shift the power imbalance. And I think the only way to do that is to work with both.
What was your favorite moment in To Kill a Tiger?
I would say for me, it's the scene where she is painting her toenails. It's the ward member has said something so ridiculous about her honor and her shame. And then I ask her if what she's done is courageous, if it took courage. And she says yes. And she has that beautiful moment where she pauses to really think. And she says yes. And I every time I see it, I really marvel at how extraordinary, how profound children are. Because at that time she was 14 years old. And for her to understand at the age of 14 that what she did was an act of courage and power, and that she had the right to demand the justice system work for her, is so extraordinary to me.
Nisha, I know you're a very busy woman. Thank you for spending time with us, and congratulations on the film. And again, thank you. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. You're pretty amazing too. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Mona Sinha is a passionate advocate for gender equality and social justice. She is the CEO of EqualityNow, and prior to working with EqualityNow, she worked with over 90 organizations fighting for women's rights and economic empowerment. So, Mona, thank you for joining us on Now You Know.
It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
Okay, so Mona, I just want to start off with some facts. Now, according to UN Women, globally, more than 735 million women have experienced physical or sexual violence at least once in their lifetime. What percentage of that is in the Global South?
Well, we know the general figure is 1 out of 3 women in the world has experienced sexual violence. Our data shows that it's about 40% in the Global South, but it's difficult to measure because data such as this is often not accurately represented or collected by government bodies. So that's an estimate, but it does seem to be more pervasive in the Global South than the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's an estimate, but it's still a high percentage. I mean, why is it so high in the Global South?
Well, there are lots of reasons around the world. I wouldn't just pick the Global South. There's systemic reasons, there are cultural reasons, there's certainly economic reasons, and of course, we can't forget the political. So patriarchy normalizes the violence against women, and especially in the Global South, where these cultural norms are very strong. Women who stand up to these challenges and challenge these norms are particularly vulnerable to being attacked. We know that men want control of women's bodies and use it as a form of controlling women, so that is more pervasive than ever. On the cultural side, of course, there are religious norms such as child marriage and FGM that perpetuate this kind of violence. So we often think about sexual violence as rape, but when you think about children who are married at 12 or 11, that is also sexual violence. You know, in conflict situations, we see that rape is often used as a weapon of war. We see sex trafficking increase. Certainly the economics of poverty see young children being sold into trafficking or other heinous crimes in order for their families to survive. And then systemically, legal barriers still exist because even though we have laws, there are some weaknesses in how those laws get implemented. For example, victims are often blamed in cases of sexual violence. Access to justice is very difficult for many people. And in many countries, shockingly, marital rape is still not outlawed. The pathways to justice are very difficult. They are blocked, often by, police or the judicial system not knowing how to respond to these allegations, not knowing how to actually deal with a survivor and not re-traumatize them every time they are questioned, for example. And just the support systems around survivors do not exist in many parts of the world. They are blamed for what has happened to them without having any accountability placed on perpetrators.
Well, speaking of the legal system, how is India currently handling cases of sexual violence?
The laws against sexual violence are strong in India. The problem is the implementation. The problem is the barriers that exist in implementing and accessing justice. You can see in the film, for example, how difficult it is for Ranjit and his daughter, how many of his meetings are cancelled or he's told to wait for hours on end. It has a huge economic impact on the family because he's a farmer and he has to stop his work and his livelihood in order to get justice. So it's very difficult to navigate the system which allows for justice for young women.
I came across an article in doing research for our chat, and I didn't know if it played a part when it came to women seeking justice in India. But there's something about the caste system. Could you explain what it is and whether that might come into play when it comes to young women who have suffered sexual violence?
So just like class is a problem that we see around the world, caste is a particular problem in many parts of the world as well. We certainly see it in India and other parts of the Global South, where it was a construed hierarchy that was established by patriarchy many decades, even centuries ago. Caste plays a really big role in this because this defines a group of people as being on the margins. And as we know, communities on the margins are often denied access to many rights, right? So access to education, access to participation in society, access to justice comes along just with that. So I do believe that plays a role. Now, while caste was banned many years ago in the Indian Constitution, it still is prevalent in the fabric of society.
We've been talking about victim blaming and how much the victim has to carry. How do we even begin to challenge those societal norms and cultural beliefs that allow violence against women in India to continue?
Victim blaming isn't new. Victim blaming is a well-developed strategy of the patriarchy. You see it even in America. You see, kids being blamed for wearing short skirts, or the narrative of, yeah, she asked for it. That's absolutely ridiculous, right? The thing about Kiran staying out late, she was at a family wedding, and one of the 3 boys that raped her was her cousin. So I really can't think of anything more ridiculous than the person who was there in order to protect her, look after her, in whose trust she was left at the wedding when her parents went home, was the one then who went out and assaulted her. So I think the cultural change part is very important, but this is where you have to talk about healthy masculinity.
But what about the elders? I mean, I'm still stuck with the women or women of a certain generation that still think, you know what, just sweep it under the rug, marry your rapist, don't bring shame onto the family. How do you get to them?
These are women that have grown up with the power of men hanging over their heads.
Mm.
And I think as they see the younger generation speak out, as they see their sons and brothers speak out, they will change their voices. I am quite confident of that. I see women who've been controlled by men, who've probably been married off as children themselves, who've probably experienced marital rape every single day without even knowing what it was or having a name around it, and who have never thought about the legal system as being on their side. And that shift will only happen as there's more education, as there's more conversation in the villages, as there is more participation by women in political structures, right? In making those rules that guide our lives. And I think that cannot be more important than even at the grassroots level of women being involved in political organizations, women being involved in making decisions, even at the village level. In India, we have the example of a few village headmen who are now head women, and those villages have thrived. And I think that example is going to shine brightly in the face of elders and everybody else who sees what's possible. And remember that centering narrative change and making sure that the laws focus on the rights of women and girls makes the whole world healthy. Because having a glass half full is never going to do the trick. So we have to center the rights of everybody.
Mona, thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. I really appreciate you coming on to Now You Know.
Thanks for having me.
So now you know what fighting for gender justice in India looks like and how difficult challenging deep-rooted systems that perpetrate these injustices really is. Thank you to Nisha Pahuja and Mona Sinha for joining me today, and a special thanks to you for watching and listening to Now You Know.